Shalom. We are in the book of Shoftim, that is Judges. We are in chapter 16, picking up where we left off 2 weeks ago. Apologize for being ill last week. Thankful Brother Yarden was able to fill in for me. Shimshon. We've been talking about Shimshon, or Samson as they anglicize it. Been dealing with some of the traditional interpretations of the life of Shimshon. And kind of underlying some of the misunderstandings that are very common. And usually it's because people read things out of context. Sometimes it's because they don't understand Hebrew culture or Middle Eastern culture at the time that Shimshon lived. But chapter 16, verse 1 says, Shimshon went to Asa, or Aza. This is Gaza today. Okay. Went to Aza, where he saw a prostitute and went in to spend the night with her. The people of Aza were told that Shimshon had come. So they surrounded the place where he was and also set an ambush for him all night at the city gate. Their plan was to do nothing at night, but to wait until morning and then kill him. However, Shimshon stayed in bed until midnight. Then he got up, took hold of the doors of the city gate and the two posts as well, pulled them up, bar and all, hoisted them on his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of the hill overlooking Hebron. Now I want you to think about something. I never noticed this until I was studying this 2 weeks ago to teach on it. As much as we look at Shimshon and we say he totally missed the mark, what could he have done if he was a true judge? Yes, he was anointed and appointed as a judge, but then he did not spend the time in the word that he should have. He did not call Israel back to the word. He missed his mark. And we talked last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, about, but even though he missed his mark on what he was supposed to be doing, Yehovah was still using him to accomplish other things. Now, in my earlier teaching, I talked about Yosef running out and leaving his garment behind, and how people try to use that as a foreshadowing of the angel in the gospel, and it's not necessarily true because it doesn't actually say what they say it says. Okay? Here I want you to think about what I see, and this could just be me, but I see this as a foreshadowing of Mashiach that I think gets missed. I have never read any scholar who says this. I've never heard any rabbi say this. But as I read through it, 2 weeks ago, it jumped out at me. He was plotted against. The plotting took place at night. They waited in ambush at night. But they said, although we're plotting at night and we're setting up the ambush at night, let's not do anything in the night. Let's wait until morning. Does anybody see a parallel to something here in the gospel? Let's have a secret inquiry, a secret judgment, and plot the death of the King of Kings at night. But let's do it during the day so nobody can say we did it at night. Let's do the killing during the day. So let's set up the plan to do this. And then a man takes up a burden that never should have been his. A burden no man should have to or be able to carry. And I'm not talking about the burden of the staros, the stake. I'm not talking about the burden of the physical weight that Yeshua had to carry. I'm talking about the burden of the weight of the sins of the world. And you know, it talks about Shimshon being so strong, and when the spirit of Yahweh would come upon him, he would become even stronger, and he would do these great feats. He was like a Superman. But you know, it doesn't say that lifting the whole thing up, bars and all, and carrying it to the top of the hill was easy. It just said he was able to do it. And when I think about this, when I read this and reread it and I look at it and I see a man, I don't see a man who picks it up and carries it with one hand like the Superman movies. I see a man laboring under a hard burden and doing for the people what they could not do for themselves. I see a man who takes a door that was shut and opens it permanently. I see Shimshon, the Shoph. Remember when we started this study several weeks ago? I told you, you will see, I hope, by the end of the book, that Yeshua HaMashiach is our Shoph. He is Shoftim. He is the judge of judges. I see Shimshon, even as many ways as he missed his calling, when he comes to this point in his life, he is still being a picture of Mashiach to come. Or for him was to come. After this, he fell in love with a woman who lived in the Sorek Valley, whose name was Delilah. The chiefs of the Philistine went up to her and said, "Coax him into telling you where his great strength comes from and how we can overcome him so that we can tie him up and subdue him. If you do, each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." You know, I've heard a lot of lessons taught about Shimshon and Delilah. I don't know that I've ever heard it taught correctly in context. You see, I've heard that's what you get for loving a Gentile. That's what you get for trusting a woman with your secrets. That's what you get for going to somebody of a different race, taking that person. I've heard this used as white people shouldn't trust black people and Chinese people, and you know this message wasn't written to white people. This message was written to people. So there's got to be something there that's not sexist and not a bigot, not racist. I think part of the big significance here is in the name of Delilah. Delilah is a Hebrew name. It's not a Philistine name. It's a Hebraic name. It literally comes from a root word that means to worship. Delilah means one who worships. We talk a lot about the power of a name. If you've been here any length of time, you know that the names of every one of my children tell you something about where I was in my faith walk when that child was born. Every name of every one of my children is a prayer and a blessing in Hebrew. Every one. I don't know that I can think of a reason why a Philistine father and or mother would name their child a Hebrew name that means to worship. I think about the argument I have a lot of times with mainline so-called Christian believers. When I say, here was this Hebrew girl, Israelite girl of the tribe of Levi, who becomes impregnated without ever being with a man, who hears from an angel, through an angel, hears from the creator of the universe that she is with child, and the child will be King of Kings, Lord of Lords, High Priest for all eternity of the Jewish faith. And she tells this to her betrothed. And she says, by the way, we're supposed to call him this anglicized Greek name. And you know, when you go back and you find, they found now the Hebrew Matthew, in the Hebrew form of Matthew, ancient script. So those Nehemiah Gordon findings. And you know what it says his name was? It says his name was Yeshua, which means Yah, the Hebrew Elohim, is salvation. Or read the other way, the salvation of Yah. And that means something. This woman, Delilah, was not named by Philistine parents a Hebrew name with this significance. I believe she was named by Israelite parents who still knew the language enough to name her a name that meant something, but they didn't care enough to bring her up to be a Jew. If they had brought her up to be a Jew, she would have seen the shaft of all of Yisrael. And she would have supported his mission, his calling. Some people think I'm too strict on my children about what it is to be Jewish, not just descended from people who were. People think that I harp too much on them about what Moshe wrote. I think Delilah found herself in this situation because her father did not harp on her about being a Jew. Delilah said to Shimshon, please tell me what it is that makes you so strong and how someone could tie you up and subdue you. Shimshon replied, if they tie me up with 7 fresh bowstrings that have never been dried, I will become as weak as any other man. The chiefs of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings which had not been dried, and she tied him up with them. Now she had been lying in wait in the inside room. So she said to him, Shimshon, the Philistines have come for you. But he snapped the bowstrings as easy as a piece of straw breaks when it touches fire, and the source of his strength remained unknown. You know, a lot of people have read this. I've heard it taught. Shimshon was a corrupt man. They say Samson, but Samson was a corrupt man. That's why he was down there with that Philistine woman. You see how corrupt he is? He didn't tell her the truth. Maybe. Or maybe he was being as wise as a serpent. You know what the scripture says? Be as wise as a serpent, as gentle as a dove. He knew the Philistines were out to kill him. He knew they had already used what was supposed to be his first wife against him. He knew they had lied in wait when he was with his other woman at Hebron. So why would he not assume that they're trying to use Delilah as much as he loves her? Why would he not assume that they've tried to get to him through her too? Delilah said to Shimshon, "You're making fun of me, telling me lies. Now come on, tell me what it takes to tie you up." "All it takes," he answered, "is to tie me up with new ropes that haven't been used. Then I'll become weak and be like anyone else." So Delilah took new ropes, tied him up, and said to him, "Shimshon, the Philistines have come for you." The people lying in wait were in the inside room. But he broke the ropes from off his arms like a thread. Delilah said to Shimshon, "Till now you have been making fun of me and telling me lies. Tell me what it takes to tie you up." He said, "If you weave the 7 locks of my hair across thread on a loom." So she fastened her cloth work in the loom with a pin and wove his hair in, then said to him, "Shimshon, the Philistines have come for you." He awoke from his sleep and pulled away from the loom pin and the interwoven cloth. She said to him, "How can you say you love me when your heart isn't with me? 3 times you've made fun of me, and you haven't told me the source of your great strength." And isn't that the weakness of so many men? To be in love. To have a conviction that we're supposed to do one thing, but we do something else. It's a hard line. It's a hard line because we're supposed to put Elohim before us in all things. We're supposed to love our wives as though their flesh is ours. And sometimes we get caught up in that. We get confused about what we should do. Here's part of how I know that Delilah was, although she was, I think, probably born Israelim, probably was not at all raised to be a faithful Jewess, because if she had been, she would have understood that his power came from Elohim, and that were he to give up that power, were he to surrender that power or the source of it and lose it, not only would he be losing it for himself, but for the entire nation. Every day she kept nagging at him and pressing at him till it bothered him to death, so that he finally told her everything. He said to her, "No razor has ever touched my head, because I have been a Nazir of Elohim since I was born." So he's under the Nazirite vow. We've talked about that in an earlier chapter. "If someone shaves me, then my strength will leave me, and I will be like any other man." When Delilah saw that he had really confided in her, she sent and summoned the chiefs of the Philistine with the message, "Come up this one last time, because he has finally told me the truth." The chiefs of the Philistine went up to her and brought the money with them. She had him go to sleep in her lap and called for a man to shave off his 7 locks of hair. Then she began tormenting him, but his strength was gone away. She said, "Shimshon, the Philistine, have come for you." He awoke from his sleep and said, "I'll get out this time, just as I shook myself loose before." But he didn't know that Yehovah had left him. So the Philistine seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Uzzah. Don't you know that's how it is when we put anything else or anyone else before Elohim? He will leave us. Not abandon us, but move away from us and take away our blessings. And sometimes we don't even know it. And the Philistines around us, the enemy or the minions of the enemy who would destroy us, can come upon us, bind us, gouge out our eyes. I say bind us and gouge out our eyes. I'm talking spiritually, bind us and gouge out our spiritual eyes, having taken our strength. And they can carry us down to Uzzah. There they bound him with 2 bronze chains and put him to work grinding grain at the mill in the prison. However, after the hair on his head had been cut off, it began growing back again. You remember what I said? Elohim may move away from us and take away our blessings. That does not mean that he has abandoned us. When he does that, it's because we have abandoned him. It's because we have abandoned his Torah. The Nazir vow. If you look it up in, I believe it's Deuteronomy chapter 6, maybe Numbers chapter 6. I'll have to go look that up. If you look it up, there were certain things that he could not do. One of them was shave his head, cut his hair. He could not do it. If he did it, he forsook the vow. By allowing his hair, by even telling someone so that they could cut off his hair, he was sinning against Elohim. By allowing it to happen, he sinned against Elohim. But even when he was bound, had his eyes gouged out, and was cast into prison, and this was not planned this way, but in the earlier teaching I was talking about Yusuf being in prison, but Elohim was still with him. Shimshon is now in prison, but Elohim is still with him. And as his hair begins to grow back, as he comes back into the requirements of the Nazir vow, his hair begins to grow back and he begins to regain his strength. It says, the chiefs of the Philistines assembled to offer great sacrifice to their god Dagon, their Elohim Dagon. As they celebrated, they sang, "Our Elohim has handed over to us our enemy Shimshon." Their Elohim, not his Elohim. His Elohim hadn't handed him over. Really, theirs hadn't either. He handed himself over by forsaking our Elohim. Upon seeing him, the people praised their Elohim. Don't you know when we go against Torah, when we violate the promise that we've made to keep his law, It makes the Gentile praise their Elohim. It's only by keeping his law that we can lead the Gentile, the Goyim, to praise our Elohim. Our Elohim has handed over to us our enemy who destroyed our land and killed so many of us. That was their song. When they were in high spirits, they said, "Summon Shimshon to amuse us." So they called Shimshon out of the prison, and he amused them. When they put him between the columns, Shimshon said to the boy holding him by the hand, "Let me feel the columns supporting the building so that I can lean on them." The building was full of men and women, and all the chiefs of the Philistines were there. In addition to them, there were about 3,000 men and women on the roof watching as Shimshon performed. Shimshon called to Yehovah Elohim, "Just this once, please think of me." He's saying, I don't deserve this. I have forsaken my calling. I have not been in the Torah. I have not called the people back to the Torah the way I was supposed to do for you. I have even forsaken the vow of the Nazir. He says, so just this once, please think of me, and please give me strength so that I can take revenge on the Philistine for at least one of my two eyes. Shimshon got a good hold on the two middle columns supporting the building and leaned on them, on one with his right hand and on the other with his left. Then, crying, "Let me die with the Philistine," he pushed with all his might, and the building collapsed on the chiefs and all the people inside. So he killed more at his death than he had killed during his life. At the end, when he had lost everything Elohim had given him because of his sin, he repented and he pleaded with Yehovah to just once give him back the blessings that he had forsaken. Just once. And Yehovah answered him. You know, we hear a lot about deathbed conversions and how they shouldn't be trusted, and you can't just get saved when you're dying and expect everything to be good. Here was a man who forsook Yehovah pretty much his entire life, threw back in his face the blessings that he had been given, the anointing that he had been given. But the moment before his death, he called upon Yehovah and he asked him to just for this time, give me your spirit. And he received it. Now, did he still pay the penalty for his sins? Yes. You know that passage that says that Yehovah chastens his own? Okay? A lot of times we pay the price for our sin. We wonder, why does this guy who's not even a believer, he does this and nothing happens to him, but I do it and all this bad happens. It's because Yehovah is chastising his own. Okay? Because he's going to deal with that other guy down the road in a different way that he doesn't want us to have to go through. So did he still pay the penalty for his own sins? Yes, he paid for it with his death. But the last thing he did was be filled with the spirit of Elohim and exercise the judgment of Elohim that he has spent his whole life running from the calling of doing. His brothers and all his father's family came down, took him, brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of his father Manoach. He had judged Israel 20 years. 20 years he had in the office trying to get it right. Actually, not even trying a lot of the time. Forsaking the calling. And you know what? As much as people like to look down on Shimshon, and as easy as that is to say he wasted his life, he wasted his calling, I don't believe he'd be recorded in this book. His life story, I don't think would take as many chapters as it does. The detail would not be given of his life and all of the times that he messed up if it weren't to point out the value of the one time he got it right. I know there are a lot of things in my life, and I tell my wife, I've tried to do certain things and absolutely failed, and I feel like, I'm called to do that thing, but I absolutely fail at it. And I think, I'm going to get there, and I'm not in that area of my life. I'm not even going to have a crown to cast at his feet. I'm going to have nothing to show for it. But then I read about Shimshon, and I think, you know what? What if right at the end, right at the very last day of my life, I finally figure out what it is that he wanted me to be doing all the time, and I do that? I hope he fills me with his spirit, and he lets me do it with the kind of power that Shimshon had. I hope it carries that much meaning in his eyes. I've even ministered at funerals before, and I've tried to correct people and said, stop talking about how the guy died. Let's talk about how he lived. Let's not talk about the 2 weeks he laid in the bed in the nursing home. Let's talk about all the years he served in the army of his God. I think with Shimshon, if I preached his funeral, I'd say, stop talking about how he got it wrong for 20 years. Let's talk about how the man died. I don't think we spend enough time talking about how Shimshon died, because he died getting it right. Do we have a midrash?